All right, what's good, everybody? It's Andrew and Chris back again. This week we're talking about the PlayStation 5 Pro. What's the good, what's the bad, and are we going to buy it? We'll see. But for this week, it's just the two of us. Raymond's out, but hopefully we can kind of fill in the gaps and really just share our thoughts as to how we felt to the reveal. But I'll throw it over to Chris. Chris, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, the PlayStation 5 Pro. So, for me, before this announcement, hearing all the news and rumors leading up to this announcement for the PlayStation 5 Pro, I personally was definitely excited about the aspect of having a PS5 Pro. A lot of times, because for the games I was playing, for example, the last game I was playing, Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, you could play you could play that game at 4K at 30 frames per second, but it just was a bit difficult to play in sometimes. Like, yes, visually when you're walking around slowly and low and like seeing the cutscenes, it would look very great. But when you're playing the game and going through the action, getting stuck at that 30 frames per second was a bit difficult when you try to compare playing it on on performance mode, right, where you're able to play at a lower scale resolution, but at like a solid 60 frames per second or so. And as much as I enjoyed the game, I always found myself flipping between settings, right? Like, for example, I would play on the slow aspects, such as exploring at like the 4K 30 frames per second mode. But when I got into action, I will always spend the time to flip it back to the performance mode where I could get that 60 frames per second. So as I was playing that game, and any other games that were similar, for example, like God of War Ragnarok, I always thought, it would be so great if I could play these games at 4K 60 frames per second. But the fact that you can't, and you can't limit it to 30 frames per second, in the back of my mind, it just tells me that the PS5 is somewhat still limited based with the games that are being made today. So, you know, leading up to the announcement for PS5 Pro, I was one of those people where I was like, okay, you know what, this is gonna come out. I am going to definitely be one of those people that are gonna buy it just because I really want to experience these games, a lot of these single player games that I play at the highest possible resolution in a more, easy on the eyes kind of refresh rate. So when the news came out for the PS5 Pro, just before the price announcement of $700, I was listening to the announcement. I'm like, okay, all right, better performance. It looks like it can have 4K 60. Um, the GPU is better, able to render faster, memory speed to be better, and so forth. And it's looking good. So I was like, okay, well, you know what? I just before the price announcement, I was like, okay, I'm sounds like I'm gonna get this. And but the moment the $700 sticker price came on, that was when, as much as I am a fan of playing these single player games in the highest fidelity possible, um, it came to me. The first thing I thought was, that is a bit of a hard bargain. Um, sure, $700, and sure, I get to play games in a higher visual that I want to see, but when you look at the numbers, the first thing I thought was, I'm paying $700 for something that's gonna primarily give me a increased frames per second of, like, twice, right? So some 30 to 60, right? And I'm paying $700 for a brand new system just to capture that, which it's great to play, but when you start putting it into and we start calculating about, like, oh, what's the price what's the value you're getting for paying that money just for that performance boost. it's it starts to get a bit hard to justify, even for me, even though I would be willing to pay that price, even though I can pay that price. It it doesn't seem like good value to me. um I mean, you read the news out there, you read the comments out there, and a lot of people say it's just absurdly expensive. I mean, yes, I mean, it's kind of makes sure you think about the PS3, the PlayStation 3 when it first came out, where they had like the $600 sticker price tag, and which, you and I, we had our hands on that PS3 when it first came out. But this announcement for the PS5 Pro at $700, it's pretty. It just rings a lot of bells and memories from that time when they announced the $600 price tag for PS3. And you know, if you think about it on like a bigger scale, like if you compare it to PC gaming, yeah, sure, $700 PS5 Pro, I would still say it's, if you look at it like that way, it's still a much more cheaper alternative than paying for something like a 4070 NVIDIA 4070 GPU, or 4080, 4090, which you're hitting up to like 2000, 2500 for like a PC build for that. So when you compare it to a PC build, yeah, the PS5 Pro is much better value in that regards. But um, for those who are comparing it to just the PS5, and then comparing with the PS5 Pro, it does become a very, very hard buy, in my opinion. To the point where I'm thinking, well, even for me, do I am I willing to pay $100 for something not that's going to be save me the few seconds I have to switch between the options of a 4K mode versus performance mode. That's a lot of money for just saving myself a few seconds of switching the on and off switch on the performance options. So yeah, that's my initial take in the beginning. I still am considering about purchasing it, but compared to before the announcement, I have to think about it versus, yeah, I'm definitely in this. I want to get this kind of thing, kind of mindset.
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, for me, I kind of caught up on the news a little later. I didn't watch it live, but I did see the initial ripple of the sticker shock, and having some time to kind of stew on it. Kind of reading both sides of the argument of just like it's a mid generation refresh. For something that like we're gonna see a PlayStation 6 relatively soon, presumably so. It's kind of a huge ass, especially given the current economic situation of that most people are probably in right now. But at the same time, it. I think something that has become increasingly more popular in gaming today is graphic fidelity, right? And just like that, being able to play at this high graphical level with frames always at like a constant 60, which for me growing up, I don't know. I suppose that wasn't necessarily like a make or break for me, and so I personally wasn't swayed too much for the PlayStation Pro, but I can understand the argument. I think for me personally, I feel like this announcement kind of solidified what I already suspected, in that I might be skipping this generation. We talked about it early on when the PS5 was first announced, and just for the record, for any listeners that we may have at some point, I actually don't have a PS5. I'm still on actually base PlayStation 4, not even the PS4 Pro. And for the most part, I'm pretty content on that. I was actually pretty slow with getting a lot of the releases on the PlayStation Pro or PlayStation 4. I kind of got sucked into that games for service type black hole, and spent a lot of time just in Apex, but didn't really give any time to any of the exclusives for PlayStation PlayStation 4. And so when the PS5 was first announced, I didn't really jump on it just because I had a huge catalog to go through. And for the most part, I think I have gone through a majority of the PS4 backlog. There are still a couple of games I still need to complete, but at the same time, looking at what has been released on the PlayStation 5, a good portion of the games are technically available on the PlayStation 4. If not on the 4, on PC. And so, that doesn't necessarily move me to pick up the PS5 anytime soon. And in fact, I think it actually pushes me further to going back to PC. You know, one of the reasons why I was actually also behind on the PlayStation 4 was because prior to that I was like fully locked into PC, right? And I have always kind of wanted to go back. It's a great place for a lot of indie games, a lot of indie developers, and I also just like kind of playing old games, not like Super Nintendo or like the classic retro 8-bit type games, but just like PS2, PS3 era type games, and so I feel like I'm pretty content with that. And in fact, I started thinking after the PS5 Pro announcement about the Steam Deck way more. And it's I'm actually I have it pulled up on a separate window right now, and the Steam Deck at just about every model is cheaper than the PS5 Pro. This is with even the 1 terabyte OLED, which is currently at $649. And I think overall that's a pretty good investment, especially considering the catalog of games that you have access to, and also, I mean, you may not necessarily be able to access some current gen games, but there are still a constant wave of indies being released that, for the most part, are often totally fine being played on the Steam Deck, and so that is actually way more appealing to me than the current PlayStation 5 Pro and even the PlayStation 5 base model. So.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that kind of brings up a interesting um, interesting topic, because based on the way you describe yourself playing the games that you play, you it definitely brings the question about who's the PS5 Pro for. So definitely when you explain yourself, like being able to consider the Steam Deck, playing indie games, being able to play games and be mobile with it, whether in the bedroom or out there at work or traveling, whatever it may be. Um, playing games on the PlayStation 4, which, yeah, I mean, it's still kicking, and it may not be the best visuals, but for the most part, it's like there. I mean, yeah, you might not get the same sharpness, you may not get all the ray tracing, all that kind of stuff, but at the core of it all, the game is still there, right? So the when you were explaining that, you clearly just explained, detailed yourself as being a different kind of player, or kind of player that isn't tied down, or isn't so much concerned about the whole visual quality. And like for me, um, you know, for the games I play, like if it's a multiplayer game, I really don't care so much for high graphical quality. I mean, as long as it's like sharp, it's like it's not, the frame rate's not dropping, stuff like that. For the most part, if it's a multiplayer game, I am content for the most part with any type of visuals. And a lot of these multiplayer games, competitive multiplayer games, where I like Overwatch, Apex, so far, they're not super graphics intensive. But for those games that are much more like cinematic or very story oriented, you have like Final Fantasy VII, Cyberpunk, so forth. Yeah, I definitely want to enjoy those games at the best graphical quality, just because the story, you know, for the most part, warrants that sense of immersion. Um, but for you, you're describing yourself as as a person that's really not concerned about that. You're just looking to have access to a certain set of games, indie games, that you want to play, and with really little mention about the whole, how do they look like, right? So I mean, it gets back to who's the PS5 Pro meant for, and yeah, thinking about it, I definitely don't think Sony is try expecting at all for these PS5 Pros to sell or replace like a large mass of existing uh, PS5 base consoles that people already own today. It's definitely something like, like I was in California recently, and I remembered about Disneyland having these like lightning passes, right? Or just you able to pay extra money just to get in front of the line, so to speak. And it really comes down to, yeah, we don't the company doesn't expect everyone to buy these more pricier objects, or pricier privileges, but they're there for those who do want to pay for it. People who do want to pay that $700 for the best graphic quality that they can play on for their PlayStation 5 games, but without having to dish the um, in comparison to in Nvidia PC um, GPU build, that's gonna easily cost a person 1,500, 2,000 and plus, just to get the best quality you can. So you know I definitely don't think Sony expects people to buy this, and in fact, I would be surprised if they did not anticipate the somewhat negative news. Maybe not so much negative, maybe more of a realistic, or like um, or maybe harsher news or reception to the PS5 Pro. But I think they know as a business that they're pricing it they're pricing it knowing that it's meant for people who want to buy it, and they're not expecting mass adoption of it. I mean, we just think about the whole um, um, unit of the PS5 Pro, right? So you just have PS5 Pro. There's no disc. There's not even a stand, in which you have to pay, in combination of the stand and the optical disc drive if you want it. You have to pay just a bit over $100 more. So you're hitting about $810 just to get the whole complete package, so to speak. And you know, I think they think they would know that the PS5 Pro isn't a value proposition to its customers. It definitely is not. I mean, I definitely cannot see that. And this is coming from me, who's willing to pay the $700 for that machine. But even though I'm willing to pay for it, in my mind, I already know that it's not really. It doesn't provide me much value. It's just more for someone who has the money, who and is willing to spend it, regardless of what the value proposition is. For me, as much as I would be willing to spend for $7, I'm also very valued. I also think about my purchases in terms of what value I'm getting, and for what they provide with the PS5 Pro. I have to think about it twice, but I can definitely tell um, they're targeting a group of people that's very niche, which is people who are not are have the money, people who like games but do not want to, or not PC gamers, or not interested in spending that money, right? So it's a very niche group of people who they're targeting. And I'm kind of curious about how much units they would be expecting to sell, what the data is, and how much it does sell. Once those numbers come out, I'll be curious to see. But they are definitely considering this as a super premium price object, especially when you compare it to a PS5 a base console that could be what 450, I think. or maybe a little bit less, or a little bit more, depending if you get like a bundle. But 450 is a pretty decent price point for a brand new console for a PS5. Sorry, not a brand new console, but a PS5 based console that will get you to play any game that PlayStation offers right now, except at 4K 60. If here's the biggest thing I think, if the game allows it to, right? Because I remember playing Cyberpunk 2077 on PS5. The game was very nice looking on the PS5. It definitely did not look as great um, on the it definitely look as great compared to like a PC with a 4080 or 4090 NVIDIA GPU. Um, so it you have to. It also depends on developers too, right? If they're actually going to utilize, if they can, if they know how, and if they're willing to spend the resources to take those games exist today and take advantage of the PS5 Pro hardware, because that's really one of the biggest bottlenecks too. Is if you want to play these games that at a PS5 Pro fidelity, if the developers don't take advantage of it, if they don't giving you an update to use the PS5 Pro power, it's really kind of a moot point of buying a PS5 Pro. And also, you got to think about it too for yourself too. Are you willing to spend the time to replay those past games that you have played before at a higher fidelity? I mean, it's a bit of an opportunity cost, right? Like, sure, there are games that we want to play again. I've done that. You've done that. We've played like multiple older games like multiple times before. Um, but with the amount of games that come out, whether it's from first party or third party games or whatever, time is not a luxury. Definitely, for me and for you, time's not a luxury that we have as much as we were before when we were younger, where we could play games quite a bit. We are a bit more picky with our games these days. So, you know, if I'm gonna, to me, if I'm gonna buy a PS5 Pro, I'm looking to buy it to play primarily games that I expect to come out in the near future and later, versus playing games that I played before. As much as I would have liked to see them, and I might, but if it's a really long game, it might be a bit harder for me to think about. Am I willing to pay $700 to play a game at a relatively slightly higher fidelity um, for a game that I already know and I already spent like maybe hundreds of hours to do, like for Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, like I've to finish recently. So yeah, it's a really really niche group of people Sony's targeting for this PS5 Pro. And are they gonna buy it? I'm sure there are gonna be people that buys it, but it's not meant for. It definitely, in my opinion, is definitely not meant for mass adoption, and I definitely don't think they intended for it to be like that at all. So yeah,
I mean, I think this also presents a question of like, at what point do graphics kind of reach that peak point where the masses just say, this is good enough, like it's fine, like to, because I think since PlayStation 4 even was announced, there was a lot more emphasis on graphical capabilities for these consoles, and it's true. I mean, you did definitely see the improvement, like the start of PlayStation 3 to where it ended with like The Last of Us, right? Like, I remember that being a moment where it's just like, wow, this is what games could look like. And then we go on to PlayStation 4, even and we get something like Spider-Man or God of War, right? And that was also just sort of like a holy cow, this looks amazing. But I feel like since going, just on those two games, even right, Spider-Man and God of War, to the next iteration in the series for both of them, and I feel like my initial response. Granted, haven't played them, but I've seen clips, and my response to it is like, "Oh yeah, this looks good." So, it looks fine, and and I do kind of feel like we've reached sort of that point where now maybe the focus needs to be on just one, the game's capability to be able to run properly, and two, on just sort of like the core content itself, right? Like, I still go back to Mass Effect, right? I just did um, like Mass Effect 2 and 3 back to back, and that was like 100 hours over the past month or so. And, these games are 12 to 15 years old. And they look fine. They're serviceable. But really, what draws me in is its core content, which are its mechanics and the story itself, and its capabilities to suck me in and feel like a part of this world, feel connected to its characters, right? And I feel like the next step beyond this, in terms of graphics, we start going into like Uncanny Valley type stuff, and at that point, it gets a little spooky.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, yeah.
And I'm not sure if I would fully enjoy things when it gets to that point. Like, I just remember, not a game per se, but that moment in Toy Story 4 when you get introduced to like the puppets, and it's a little too real, and they move way too fast, and I felt frightened in the theater. And I don't really want that sensation in my home at night while everyone else is asleep, and this is like my only time to play. And now suddenly I'm afraid of what's on screen, and it's not even a scary game.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, no, I mean that's a good point because I mean there's a thing of like there's a point of diminishing returns, right? Like yeah, I mean I think for certain games, yeah, it could warrant the trying to push the graphical performance to the best it can for the sake of the game. Like for example, if it's a game like a heavy story driven game like Final Fantasy or Last of Us, um, those games are super narrative heavy, right? Having that sense of immersion and realism um, can goes along with it. It augments, it improves, it adds more to the whole experience. I definitely would agree with um, that perspective. But and like you said, but like you said, for everything else, you know, what matters most is the gameplay, the core the game, right? Is the game fun, right? And you definitely don't, especially today with the way technology is today, you definitely don't need to have a game that's pushing the the hardware performance to the max just to convey that fun gameplay. Like yeah, I agree. Mass Effect is a great game for. I mean, whether you have qualms about one, two, and three, one, three, although we all know that two is the um, most like the best one of the trilogy, the original trilogy. Um, yeah, those games hold up very well. They're still very fun, and even though they don't look as great compared to games as of today, they're still, you still engage with the story because the story is so good. The voice acting is so good. The visuals are space opera. All those visuals are very appealing and very fun to be in. Um, and they're still very fun. You can argue more funner than the games that are being made out today. And that goes for other games that are not PlayStation games, right? Like Nintendo, right? So Nintendo is not pushing games that are like super graphics intensive. Like you have games that are very cartoonish, whether it's a Mario, Luigi kind of game, a Zelda game. I mean, they're not pushing these kind of games that are super high in graphical intensity. They're just focusing on the gameplay, which definitely resonates with a lot of people because Nintendo is still selling, it's still the number one selling hardware game console. compared to Xbox, compared to PlayStation, and even though I mean it's relatively cheaper, um, it's portable. People can play games wherever they want. And you could argue Nintendo reuses a lot of its core IPs. You have Mario, Donkey Kong, whatever, all this stuff, Zelda, right? And those characters are always used again and again. It's some new version, iteration of their characters in the new game, but people are still buying it, still enjoying it, and without the whole investment of you know pushing, being able to see the sweat on Zelda's head or Link's head, or being see Mario's mustache at 4K quality or 8K, whatever you want to do. I mean, people are still enjoying those games for what they are, regardless of the graphical performance. So yeah, I mean, it's just, I agree with what you're saying, that you don't really, games at this point in time don't I don't think they need to go any further. I don't think it's necessary. I think it's good to have. I think there's a place for it for certain types of games that are really trying to tell a story that does require that um, the best visuals you can get to convey their story. But if as a game designer, if you're trying to build a game, you know, I think you would not need it so much either. And you could, and many people, and in fact, that's not even my opinion. I mean, the people are saying that with their wallets, right? I mean, you have a lot of people who are playing games on PS4. You have publishers, studios that are selling their games that they're making that still they want PS4. So there is still a huge audience of people who are playing games on PS4 and are not feeling the need to upgrade, just like you, right? Not needing to upgrade for that performance. Um, and so, it kind of gets back to what I was saying earlier. Yeah, this is a very, very niche. PS5 Pro is a very niche object for a very specific group of people. Um, is it needed? It's good to have. Is it needed? No. As much as I would be interested in getting a PS5 Pro, I definitely agree with the statement that it's not something that is needed. Um, if they can instead invest more time and push out games faster, because like for example, Final Fantasy 7, right? It's part Final Fantasy 7 remake part one, rebirth part two, and then they're gonna do the third one. That's gonna take like 3 years, another 3 years at least, because that's how long it took for between remake and rebirth. And you know uh, if I had to choose between the best graphical performance for Final Fantasy VII's ending part 3 versus having come out sooner, if the gameplay does not change at all, and I only get like a little bit less visual quality for Final Fantasy VII's end part 3 ending, I would prefer that they able to get that game out sooner than 3 years. Um, yeah, and yeah,
I mean, all things considering, though, 3 years is a win for Square Enix. I mean, given
that's true.
I don't know what the from about like 2010s ish to like
Yeah,
2020, their development cycle was kind of crazy. I mean, we waited how long for something like Kingdom Hearts 3, which in the meantime they would release all the one like remixes and stuff that would only just like give you 5 minutes more worth of story. Um, the Final Fantasy games too, right? Like the development cycle for 15, right? Which was originally versus 13 at the time,
yeah,
right? So is that? But I do think 3 years in general is actually like a pretty good development cycle. I mean, isn't that basically what we got for like Spider-Man to Spider-Man 2 as well for uh,
mm.
the most recent iterations, about 3 years. And
Yeah. I
I
think
mean,
so. Yeah, about there.
while like graphically, it doesn't seem like it changed that much. I mean, mechanically, vastly different games from what I can tell.
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah, it's that's true. I mean, like, yeah, I think, well, yeah, for sure, Square Enix, definitely infamous, especially back in like the 2010s and so forth. Very infamous for having these really long development cycles. I mean, yeah, whatever was going on at Square Enix at the time, maybe they were just trying too many things, um, too many things at the same time. You hear things about like Japanese decision making process for corporate Japanese corporate life being a bit kind of the not the most efficient way of doing things. Well, compared to doing business here in like the western side of the world. But yeah, I mean, it definitely for Square Enix to be able to do commit to a 3 year time frame is good enough. But at the same time, when you read the news about that development cycle for 557, that's was really there because of their intention, like they really want to get this game done and done proper and on time. And so there were articles that you could see news about Fallout 5 production where they announced they were allocating resources. They were keeping people on the team for Final Fantasy 7 remake onto doing Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, and they're likely going to do the same thing again for Part 3, where they're going to keep the same people who are already familiar with um, building the game using the original people to build it. So it just and there's also the mention of them deciding to use an upgraded Unreal Engine, um, to upgrade Unreal Engine to perhaps try to get the best visual quality for that finale for Final Fantasy 7. And you know, playing Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, you know, I was already very content, very satisfied with the visuals. I mean, yes, I couldn't play it in 4K 60. It was still at 4K 30, and you can still play it. I mean, you can still play it fine. You just it's just not as responsive compared to if you're playing on a controller at 60 hertz. But otherwise, that's not diminishing the game at all, really. Other than just it's just easier on the eyes. So yeah, it's graphics. I don't I don't see it like you mentioned at the very beginning. I don't see a need for games today, majority of games today, to push hardware heavy performance just for the sake of performance, unless it really, really, really tells or augments or increases the storytelling that they're trying to tell. Like maybe, for example, like I don't know, maybe this upcoming Mass Effect game that's being made right now, maybe if the game's narrative required some sort of like really unique visual, like some sort of like visual rendering of like a black hole, like how Interstellar does, right? It renders a black hole in a very, very crazy way that needs that hardware. Then yeah, sure, okay, yes, that graphics support performance is needed to probably tell that storytelling aspect um, for something like that. But otherwise, you know, at most technology today has made games to be very, very look very, very good at this point. And to push it even further, how much more benefit are you getting? I mean, are you getting more pixels, more finer details? Sure, but how much more benefit do you get as a gamer? How much more benefit are you getting? Are you really spending time in your gameplay to really look at the finer details? Most likely not. Um, as a game developer, as a game publisher, are you making much more money for pushing the graphics quality on those games? Are you making much more money? Probably not. I mean, in fact, you're most likely incurring additional costs. I mean, which you could say is one of the reasons why you hear a lot of these game studios being shut down these past couple of years, because of the rising costs of game development. So there's a point of diminishing returns, for sure. And again, Yeah, is it needed? Is this PS5 Pro needed? Definitely don't think so. I think I would argue PS5, Sony would probably done no better than if they had not made a PS5 Pro. Like if they just focused on the games only, getting more exclusive, more first party titles, exclusive games to PlayStation, I would argue they probably could. That would probably be a more strategic move on being able to be a more profitable business for PlayStation versus making PS5 Pro at $700 price point for a very niche audience.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, ultimately, gameplay is king, right? And I mean, I think that's kind of what Nintendo's motto is. I mean, a lot of their first party games don't necessarily speak to me, but a lot of people enjoy them and they're fun and very accessible to anyone of all ages. And so I think that's something that really should be considered, kind of moving forward. I think with the recent success of Astrobot 2, right? From what I've seen, um, spoilers of kind of what happens in that game. I do think it they Sony may have found their Mario competitor in this,
Yeah.
and I think the reviews kind of speak to that as well. But on a side note, going back to some of the things that you were saying, I started giggling to myself because we were talking about graphics and stuff, and you had mentioned, like, do we want to see Mario's mustache in 4K? And all I could think about was those like hyper realistic shots of like Ren and Stimpy. You could just imagine that in Mario, and then like as it zooms in, there's just like a little bit of a mushroom growing, and then like a spider just like crawls through as he creates like Peach, maybe.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, that might pushing graphical fidelity to the max for something like that. You may not get what you really want. It may come out to be I think something that backfires. Like, oh, okay, I didn't need to see that at all. Um, but yeah, I mean, yeah, do we need it? I don't know. I honestly can't say. I think based on what we can see today, the data today, the behaviors of gamers today, you know, the fact that PS4 games, current gen games, are being made available to PlayStation 4 consoles, PlayStation 4 Pro, you know, it just makes a statement to the fact that, yeah, graphics is good to have, not necessary though. Not necessary. Yeah.
I think that is a perfect place to wrap up this episode. But let us know what you guys think. For anyone who's watching this, is the PlayStation 5 Pro for you? Yes or no? Are you like me and thinking more about the Steam Deck if you don't already have one? But let us know in the comments or in reviews. If this is on YouTube, like, share, subscribe, and the doobly doos. But until next time, goodbye.